$355 million is what Trump owes, according to this decision. $4 million is what Don Jr. owes. $4 million is what Eric Trump owes. $1 million is what Weisselberg owes. That's how they get to the 364 million number. So again, 355 to Trump, 4 to Don Jr., 4 to Eric, 1 million to Weisselberg. Excuse me, I'm getting handed papers left and right. Because I think it's worth just reading out loud. In order to borrow more and at lower rates, defendants submitted blatantly false financial data to the accountants, resulting in fraudulent financial statements. When confronted at trial with the statements, defendants' fact and expert witnesses simply denied reality. And defendants failed to accept responsibility or to impose internal controls to prevent future recurrences. As detailed herein, this court now finds defendants liable, continues the appointment of an independent monitor, orders the installation of an independent director of compliance, and limits defendants' right to conduct business in New York for a few years.
You may have heard that Ivanka Trump was ordered to testify today in the New York Attorney General's ongoing civil fraud trial against her father, the Trump Organization, and a bunch of individuals, including both of her brothers, Don Jr. and Eric. Ivanka's herself not a defendant in the case. So when does the AG want to know from her? When Ivanka worked for the Trump Organization, she was involved in negotiating certain loans for and presenting her father's statements of financial condition to various lenders and banks. And it's those interactions, including with others in the Trump Organization, and what they knew at the time that the Attorney General wants to learn about.
Hunter Biden never worked in the White House. You know who did? Jared Kushner. But it should be noted here that Kushner also, his background in real estate, not exactly as a hedge fund magnate or a peace broker in the Middle East.
It's becoming a little less clear what he actually worked hard at, because after he left the White House, he went out and raised $3.1 billion, that's billion with a B, for a private equity fund. And as you pointed out, he's not a private equity guy, he's a real estate guy. So where did this money come from? Some of it we know from filing, some of it we know from press reports. What we know for a fact is he raised the $3.1 billion. What we also know for a fact is that only about $30 million of it actually came from investors in the United States. All the rest of it is foreign money. And of that foreign money, $2 billion of it came from the Saudis. And not only did it come from the Saudis, but the Public Investment Fund, which is the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, from which this money came, the board of it voted against giving the money to Jared, and they were overruled by MBS, who said, give him the $2 billion. I've been in this business 40 years. I have never seen someone get $2 billion out of $3 billion, get 2/3 of their money from a single investor. Usually a single investor might be a few percent of the fund, might be 5%, occasionally 10%. Never seen this. Another $200 million we believe came from Qatar. Another $200 million we believe came from the UAE. And then the $625 million that came from foreign investors that we don't even know who they are. So what was Jared Kushner doing in the White House? And by the way, as a fun fact, on January 6th, the famous January 6th, Jared Kushner was in the Middle East. But again, we're going back to a guy who's a real estate guy, and frankly not a particularly good one at that, who suddenly got $3 billion trying to do private equity deals, competing against people who've been in the business a long time. And I wouldn't, if I were the Saudis, count on making a lot of money from this anytime soon.
So Steve, we want to, as a last question, look at the graph there and that really little tiny sliver at the top, which is just 1%. 1% of the money raised is from United States investors. Just based on your experience, how unusual is that?
It's extraordinary, Jonathan. I've also never seen that as well.
I rise today to urge House Republicans to investigate one of the modern American scandals and political cons. Now, why did the Saudi government give Jared Kushner $2 billion just months after he left the Trump White House? Kushner, who oversaw Middle East policy for his father-in-law, has enriched himself and his family in what is clearly an enormous grift and likely serious conflict of interest crimes. So let's review. First, Jared Kushner conned his way to a cushy White House job with no clear job description and no experience. Then he took it upon himself to prioritize pushing out the U.S. Secretary of State so he could cozy up to the Saudi government. Now, once he was close enough to the Saudis, we have records of a $110 billion arms deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia that was inflated at the direction of Jared Kushner. Then mere months after Kushner exits the White House, what happens? The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia overrules his own investment advisors and sends $2 billion to Kushner's company's bank account. Now, in the exact words of Republican Chris Christie, who I'll quote, "The grift from this family is breathtaking. It's breathtaking. Jared Kushner and Ivanka Kushner walk out of the White House and months later get $2 billion from the Saudis." Now, some colleagues from across the aisle have explicitly said the Kushner family has engaged in business dealings that may have crossed the ethical line, and I agree, yet they refuse to act. Is this the same party that's obsessed with President Biden's family? And the American people deserve answers, and I urge my colleagues across the aisle to answer all our calls and subpoena Jared Kushner's company once and for all. Thank you, and I yield.